If you are looking for a speaker for your organization, look no further than Dr. Janice Fortman, an international speaker, award-winning author, and producer and host of Relationship Matters TV. What sets her apart is that she connects the heart of relationships with the power of communication and leadership. Dr. Jan's goal is not simply to inspire audiences for a moment, but to give them the insight and tools to transform the way they live, lead, and relate to others. Contact her at drjan@drjanicespeaks.com or 1-877-667-7325.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is Dr. Jan with Relationship Matters TV. I hope everyone is having a beautiful, blessed morning, afternoon, or evening. I have a question for you. Are you suffering from burnout? Are you suffering right now? You suffered in the past. You're afraid that you're going to suffer in the future because you're kind of overwhelmed and don't know what to do. Well, I have an expert on today that's going to help you with burnout. I'm going to bring him on. MG. When I watch his video, it's like, does he know me? Does it? Because I need all of that. So let me tell you who this expert is. His name is Dr. André Walton. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He spent 15 years turning his patented ideas into global leaders in their field. His C-ducer microphone, this is something, a little off of burnout, but I just wanted you to know, became the mic of choice for icons in the entertainment industry like Frank Sinatra, Dave Brubeck, bring back memories for me, the Moody Blues, Abbey Road Studios, Music City, Music House, the Sidney Opera House, and the list goes on. But tonight, we're going to have a conversation about his unique Banish Burnout Program. I cannot wait. And it uses his unique Sperical Thinking process. Dr. Walton is also an international best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and his work has been shared with organizations including NASA, the Virgin Group, the Smithsonian Institute, H.B. Lloyd Banks, and the Welsh government. And he is also a contributor to Harvard Business Review. Ooh, gee. Without further ado, as they say, I am going to bring to you Dr. André Walton. Good evening. Well, I can say good evening because I'm here in Chicago, but you're in
Good evening, Dr. Jan. Really nice to see you again.
It's very, very, very nice to see you. I want to jump right into this because the first question I have for you is, what made you decide to focus on burnout?
Well, I think the biggest motivation was the fact that in the last year of my 15 years as an entrepreneur, I was plunged into burnout. And for some people, this is kind of a slow descent. For me, a number of things came together to send me plummeting down the chute of burnout. And, it stuck in my mind because today burnout is often kind of used in a relatively casual way. How are you doing today? Oh, I'm feeling burnt out today. Now, people that have really had serious, no fooling around burnout will know that that is a serious underestimate of what burnout can do to you. It's an absolutely devastating process. So when I started to develop my spherical thinking process as part of my coaching practice, one of the things I really wanted to tackle head on was burnout. And also in part because the numbers are so huge. I mean, you're talking about 50 to 60% of working adults in the US reporting having had burnout in the last 18 months. And half of those will have it recur again in the next 18 months. So, I call it the silent epidemic because a lot of people, particularly, I'm ashamed to say, the males of the world, will tend to be in denial. They feel that burnout is a sign of weakness. And so, quite often it will go way too long. And it can be very, very dangerous when it does that. I mean, nobody knows precisely how many burnout victims commit suicide, but it is a significant number. So, it is a serious thing to take up. So that was my motivation.
So how do we know that we're suffering from burnout rather than just thinking that maybe we're just overwhelmed, with all that we have to do? What's the difference?
Well, I think certainly, just day-to-day stress can lead to anxiety, can lead to burnout. I mean, this can be a path. And so, when you start to notice, for instance, that maybe you are pushing away friends and family, and maybe even colleagues at work. These are the very people that could help you, but it's a characteristic of people getting burnout that they will tend to push them away. When you come to realize that all those recreational pastimes you used to enjoy, maybe a game of tennis with the friends on Saturday, or whatever it is, game of cards on Wednesday, when you realize that they have all disappeared into history, and then you kind of have a look at, maybe your sleep is deteriorating, maybe your self-care is deteriorating, your diet, you're not really paying too much attention. There are all sorts of these symptoms come together to be an indication that you could be in burnout or at least on the path to it.
Oh, so it was something that you said, and I'm going to read it. It's you said, people don't burn out because they're weak. They burn out because the way we're taught to think about work, pressure, and creativity is fundamentally flawed. So, how are we taught? I mean, explain that to me, to the audience.
If you watch young children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, particularly, when my granddaughters were growing up, I spent a lot of time with them when they were young. And every day, every new little thing, every new little idea, they would come and present to me. And I could see them trying to use this new information to make sense of their world. And so that is pure creative thinking. That is That is what we call divergent thinking. You've got to look at, when you're putting a new puzzle piece into a jigsaw puzzle, you've got to look at the whole picture. And as we become adults, that way of thinking tends to be replaced by a very deductive, analytical kind of process. We talk about drilling down and focusing in. And it's a symptom of our techie, complex world that we've developed for us. So that's really what I mean by learning it. It's learning in the sense that the social norms that surround us, or the pressures of the world and how we're expected to live, tends to drive us into that very convergent way of thinking. And if you've ever been with people who have a lot of stress, anxiety, or even burnout, you'll notice that they tend to get trapped in what I call the hamster wheel effect. That you're talking to them and they really can't move away from the issues that relate to their particular pain and their stress. And the trouble with that is that they can't see the future. They're like a racehorse with blinders on, and they can't see the future, so they can't see their own options. And that contributes to this whole stressful process. If we feel trapped, if we feel unable to see other options for our lives, that can add to the whole stress and anxiety process. So that's really what I mean by learning. In other words, the social norms that surround us really do create how we think. Now, there are ways that we can put that early childhood way of thinking back into our lives. And that's a powerful tool, because you've got this very convergent process of analytical thinking. You add creative thinking back into it, which is the opposite. And it's like putting two lenses together. One corrects for the other. And so you can start to then see the future. You can see the future, you can see options, you can see your whole world starts to expand again when you get creative thinking back into it. And it's a very, very powerful process to help people with burnout, anxiety, stress, even grief and trauma. Because all these things trap you in a convergent way of thinking. They trap you into this hamster wheel kind of process. And so you get back to creative thinking, and you've suddenly got a lot more options ahead of you, and everything, in other words, it's like putting life back into perspective.
Okay. And so you have described people that, let's say, I have seen, but, you can ask them a question. You can ask them, are you suffering from burnout? And they'll say, oh, no. But you see that they are. They might say, like I said, oh, they're just overwhelmed. Oh, I'm just overwhelmed. I just have so much to do. But like you say, you see this thinking like this. Yeah. And I see what you're saying about how the creativity is gone. So now you have the Burnout Program, and you are the founder of the Burnout Foundation. And you talk about Sperical, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Yes, Sperical Thinking. So yes. Explain to us what Sperical Thinking is and how you came up with it.
Well, Sperical Thinking is the process of putting this creative thinking process back into your way of thinking, your way of seeing the world. So in the old days, back when I started to develop this concept, people thought of the left brain as being the deductive, analytical part, and the right brain being the creative kind of bit. And that's all been blown out of the water. That's now proven to be not the case. But nonetheless, really? Okay. That was back in 2011, the University of Utah, when they were first using what they call fMRI, functional MRI, where you can actually see what people, the neural paths along which people are thinking as they're thinking it. So they managed to establish, and this has been demonstrated many other times as well since, but they've managed to establish that basically no matter what you're thinking about, you are going to be, the chances are you're going to be using all of your brain. I mean, all parts of the brain. So that's the notion of spherical thinking. But more importantly, when although the left brain, right brain's been debunked, you're still looking at different neural pathways when you think creatively. So you see somebody thinking, you give them an analytical task and you see certain neural pathways light up in the brain under this fMRI imaging process. And then you say, okay, let's give them some little test, which is neither here nor there. It's almost just like sort of cleansing the palate between courses in a meal. And you say, okay, well, now I want you to do some creative thinking, and you will see different neural pathways light up. And what is interesting is that those different neural pathways are the same ones we use when we're thinking with emotional intelligence. Plus, it's already been shown for decades and decades through my work and many other people's that doing and thinking creatively actually correlates with happiness. So when you introduce creative thinking back into your processes, it's a triple whammy. I mean, you're suddenly seeing all the options, so you're going to make better decisions. Your life suddenly looks much more positive than it did. You've got you're using emotional intelligence as you're doing that, plus you're increasing your happiness because it's a creative process. So it's a very, very powerful process.
So you use the words emotional intelligence, and that's a word now, words now that they bandy around, they throw around a lot. So explain to my audience what emotional intelligence is.
Well, first of all, it's got nothing to do with intelligence as you know it. So okay. It is a measure of a number of different factors that are very positive in our outview. The most important of them really is empathy. Emotionally intelligent people have a high degree of skill in putting themselves into somebody else's shoes. So one of the things that managers, HR people, upper executives, one of the things that they most frequently complain about in where we are today is finding people that have emotional intelligence. You know, if you want somebody with an MBA, you know, you're going to have 1,000 resumes on your desk. When you start to ask questions that relate to emotional intelligence, then it becomes more and more difficult to combine that with the skills that you need. So it's a very important attribute, and it encompasses a number of different things. And so I mentioned empathy and the ability to really put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and that makes a big difference if you're, you know, a manager or something like that, because it may make you step back and think, you know what, I shouldn't phrase what I was going to say exactly like that. I should choose a different phrasing. So that's the other another aspect of emotional intelligence, is that ability to manage your own emotions. So to be able to say, okay, somebody says something that really kind of triggers you, or it makes you angry, or whatever it is, then the emotional intelligent person will be able to say, okay, I recognize this is one of those times I've got to take a deep breath for a minute, and then I'll reply when I've had a chance to really think about what I'm going to say. So all this can happen very quickly, you know, 1-2 seconds. but it is that those are the probably the most important aspects of emotional intelligence.
And that helps to does that help to prevent burnout, or if you are burned out, that instilling that is what helps to bring out it helps to bring you away from being burned out if you have that. And the reason why I'm asking that is because, and this is just me, you can have so much empathy that you become burned out. That's why I asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it helps.
I think one of the, I'm sorry, I think we've got a little bit of a delay there. I beg your pardon.
No, you go ahead.
I think one of the things that sort of brings all this together is the idea of being able to stand back and look at the picture almost as if you're somebody from the outside. And that's one of the other factors that you can add to the list of emotional intelligence. And if you think about it, that if you just take that one thing, the ability to kind of stand back and say, okay, I need to look at the big picture here, that is one attribute that highly creative people tend to have. And so it's not entirely surprising that those neural pathways related to creative thinking are the same ones as we use with emotional intelligence, because, you know, highly creative people, you know, they can't do what they're doing in tunnel vision. You know, if you're waking up in the morning to write a book or to paint a picture or make a sculpture or something, you really need to have a big picture view of the world. You know, you're not going to be sort of focused in on one little thing. This is about, you know, I mean, if you want to create a piece of sculpture, you know, you've got so many different things to about. Well, I think I know the picture that I want to, you know, put into 3 dimensions here, but I've got to choose the right stone. You know, if you want something with fine detail, you don't have a piece of stone where every time you chip it, some big piece comes off it. So, you know, there are so many different things to think about. You know, if you're whether you're, you know, an artist, a writer, a painter, whatever it is, sculptor, playwright, you know, whatever it is, you've got so many different dimensions to put your ideas into practice. And that means this process of stepping back. You know, you might have a brilliant idea, but for one particular reason, it might be totally impractical to actually pursue. So you have to cut that off at the pass pretty quickly. You know, otherwise you're going to waste your life doing things that can't actually be finished. So, you know, you can see, I think, how emotional intelligence creeps into this whole picture about creative thinking.
Okay. All right. So I know that you have a coaching program, and a text came in, and it says, the text is just a question. What is the youngest adult you have seen being affected by burnout?
I've actually seen, I've seen students in their late teens
Really?
suffering from burnout. Absolutely. In all cases, they were the children of highly ambitious parents for them, pressured them to do, you know, a lot of study, a lot of focus, sometimes focusing on things that they don't really want to be doing. So, you know, it's not uncommon to come across, you know, I have teenagers as, you know, as my clients as well as adults. And it's really not uncommon to find kids being guided, to put it kindly, into a profession to which they're not really suited. And they're not really, now, the human beings are incredibly adaptable. And that's one of their big strengths. One of their big weaknesses is that they're incredibly adaptable. So it's not uncommon to find somebody going into a profession in their mid-20s, maybe, in their late teens, they were persuaded that they, no, you really don't want to be a painter or a writer or whatever, that you're never going to make any money at that. You need to be doing this. And so they prepare that kind of platform to do that. And then in their mid-20s, there they are. They're now, a lawyer, an accountant, or whatever it is. And then, 15 years later, they have a little look in the mirror and they say, you know what, I'm not actually sure if I'm equipped to do this. But right down in the early stages, that will show up as burnout. So if there's something that you really love, your passion is there with this particular subject, you can really do a lot of work before you feel tired and exhausted. I mean, you do something that you really love. I mean, in my case, it's everything to do with creative thinking. Then, it is energizing. It's a positive energy source. But if you then sort of say, take something that you really don't want to be doing, and I personally hate marketing. So and then it becomes an energy sink. It sucks the energy out of you. And so, and that's not uncommon for teens to be sort of guided in an area that, with the best of intentions, their family feels is more suited to, what they should be doing. And if it's not absolutely right for that person, that will sow the seeds of burnout.
Wow. When you were talking about this quite some time ago, I worked in a psychiatric clinic, and there was this young lady who would come in, and it was her parents, were pushing her to get a Ph.D. and she didn't want to do it. And when she explained, I used to type up the psychiatric reports. And what she said was that they were pushing so much into the back of her head that she could see a hole here in the front. And all this knowledge was coming out because it was too much knowledge. So I could see probably along the way, she suffered from burnout, so much so that she ended up having to see a psychiatrist because of that. Yeah. So I can see where you, and I, it made me think of that, but I never thought of it as burnout. But
yeah. It's not a well defined process. Like if you've got sort of something physically wrong with your body, it's easy to kind of pinpoint it. Well, that's my shoulder that's hurting. But something like burnout, the overall impact can take many different forms. I've mentioned the 3 pillars that I work on with my clients, and they're always there, pushing people away and getting rid of all your excess kind of recreational activities, which of course makes the whole deal worse. And then the 3rd pillar is responsibilities. People tend to take on too many responsibilities when they're in the process of getting burnout. So all these things are very negative, but it's not as easy to define as it is with a physical problem. And that's really why Western medicine defines burnout as it doesn't accept the term burnout. It just in that view, it subsumes it under the heading of work created stress. That's just a terrible term to use because firstly, burnout has no boundaries. I mean, if you get burnout as a function of your relationship with your work, then it doesn't stay there. I mean, it's going to wreck the rest of your life as well. It's going to get its way into your home life as well, and vice versa. If you've got things going on in your home life that are, really devastating, that's going to impact every aspect of your life. So burnout doesn't know boundaries. The other way in which that term, work-related stress, is really unhelpful, is that it depends how you want to define stress. See, my definition of stress is a little different. My definition of stress is that what happens when someone does not have the resources to deal with a challenge. That's my definition of what happens with stress. And so you can have two people doing exactly the same work, and one of them can be burnt out and the other one can be energized. So it's what that definition does is it means there's no point in hunting around with your work situation to say, why is it I'm feeling burnt out? You have to take responsibility for some of that being how you address the stress that you're in, how you deal with it. That stress could be there because you're not suited to your job. It could be there because you're simply working too hard. It could be there because you're not getting on with the people in that environment. There's all sorts of different reasons. But, to just say it's work-related stress, people will be, lifting up filing cabinets and chairs and desks. What is it about my environment that's causing me to be stressed? And that's not helpful. But the definition of stress that accompanies the fact that it's something to do with the way that you're thinking, that is helpful, because then we can start to work on that.
Okay. Well, a comment came in, but I think you've answered it, and I want to make sure that you have. Renita Dixon said, forgive me if this was already shared, but how do you know if you're burned out and not just tired? What are the symptoms? But I think what you did, you talked about the symptoms. And Renita, if you put in the chat, if there's another question, or if what he was explaining kind of satisfied your question. So just put it in the chat if it's something, more that you wanted to know. So, because, and I'm going to say this, we often think about being burnt out, that it has to do with work. And when you said about how it can really, you can be burnt out, and it doesn't have to do with your professional life. It can also have to do with your personal life. And I never thought of it that way.
Well, and it's probably you see this in a very clear kind of way when you look at statistics, in the sense that women are actually more likely to get burnout than men. And
really?
Yeah. And if you think about a professional couple, more often than not, and by no means is this 100%. So I don't want a big stack of men getting upset with me saying this, but it is quite often the case that when something disturbs the smooth flow of life at home, that it is the woman who ends up having to deal with that on top of her professional life. So the phone rings, and one of the offspring is sitting in the principal's office, and you've got to go and sort it out. Or, the little darling's fallen off some piece of play equipment and is clutching his arm as if he's broken it or whatever. It's more often than not, it's the woman that gets to sort that out. So, when you sort of have a look at that in practice, in real life, you begin to see why women are actually more likely to be burnt out than men.
Wow. Okay. And do women will women admit to it more so than men?
Well, that's another question. I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. I think both women and men can quite easily fall into the trap of feeling that that burnout's a weakness. I don't think that is uniquely male. What I do know, my daughter happens to be a labor and delivery nurse. She's been in that profession for 20 years or so, and so I know that, for instance, if I'm talking to some of her colleagues and so about burnout, that they're much more likely to treat it as if it's an ailment, it's a disease. I'm not seeing people get sort of ashamed of having burnout, especially since COVID, when I doubt whether there's anybody in the medical profession who didn't get some degree of burnout. But so I think the attitude depends really what you're doing and what your work and home environment are about. I mean, there's certainly no justification for people feeling that burnout is any kind of a sign of weakness. But that is something that I have noticed in both men and women, and possibly I haven't really got a statistically valid number on that. But.
Okay, I can see where people will say it's a sign of a weakness, because you can be trying to handle something, and a person, you're having difficulty, and you might be feeling the burnout, and then a person will say to you, "Oh, you mean you can't handle that? What's wrong with you? That's so easy." And seeing that as a sign of weakness. Okay, a text just came in, and the question is, have you ever had to counsel someone close to you, and if so, how did that work out?
The answer is no. I haven't had to coach anybody close to me regarding burnout, and in general, I think it's a very that more often than not, it's not a good idea to be coaching somebody that's close to you anyway. I don't know if how you react to that, Dr. Jan, but my feeling is I'll coach friends, but really close family members, I don't think it's a very good idea for a coach to be coaching them. Now, what I do, one of my Banish Burnout programs is a self-help program. So You've got eight modules with videos and so on and so forth. Now, I will certainly put them in touch with with that program, because that doesn't involve in my interaction. But when you've got a family member, any kind of coaching is problematic, because you already have your perception of that person, and you already have knowledge about that person and what they've done in their lives and so on and so forth. And that's not a great place to start when you're coaching.
So you have 3 different programs?
Yes, I do. I have I have 2 programs that are very one-on-one intensive, and they're really designed for people who have very serious burnout, and then kind of moderate burnout or anxiety. And so, and then I have the 3rd program, which is really aimed at people who are in the early stages of burnout, or they just need to address the issues of stress and anxiety, and they'd rather do that on their own rather than one-on-one. So yes, I have those 3 programs.
So when you have that one-on-one program, how do you start it, and how do you know that this person needs this one-on-one?
Um, well, people are generally self-selecting. When they decided to go into a one-on-one program, that really is a sign that they have suddenly decided to admit there's a problem. And at that point, at any point, the one-on-one program is the quickest way to solve the issue, because I'm your accountability partner as well as your coach. So, if we agree you're going to do certain things by this next session, I will be the one that texts you every couple of days to see how you're doing with it, and so on and so forth. So, that's really the process that goes on with the one-on-one coaching. It's really, anybody can join a one-on-one program. What I do, though, is the first thing that people do is to complete an assessment questionnaire.
Okay.
So that tells me where they are in the whole process, and if they're if they're depressed or they are stressed but not ready to the level of burnout, then I can coach them in different ways that might be more productive.
Oh, okay. So can you give me an example of if a person is just stressed, and so after you have the assessment, you find out that they're just kind of stressed and not really burned out. Give me an example of how you would start coaching them.
Well, it's important to realize the difference between stress and anxiety and burnout. Anxiety and burnout can exist without any defined reason. So anxiety, for instance, can exist after a problem has disappeared. So if you're stressed by, your boss at work, he just seems to be picking on you and he's got no kind of emotional intelligence. He just doesn't treat you in a way that makes you feel comfortable. And that goes on and on and on and on. And you're not going to give into it in the sense of go look for another job. It's going to go on and on. Now, if that manager just leaves, for some people it'll be, oh, thank goodness, that's the end of that. For others, that anxiety, that stress will continue, and that becomes anxiety. In other words, anxiety is stress, but with no concrete reason behind it. And that's true of burnout. People with burnout, it's impossible for them to tell, what was the cause of this burnout. So stress is different. So if somebody comes to me with stress, then we can have a look at what in their lives is originally causing that stress. And we can dig into that, and we can find ways of alleviating the problem that causes. Now, it's not always easy. And a lot of times people think a certain thing is stressing them, and then by session 2, they realize that that's not the thing at all. Some totally different thing is causing the stress. It just happens to look as if it's this. So it's not always particularly easy, but that's the key thing with stress. You've always got, something that eventually you will define exactly what it is that's causing that problem, and that'll give you the tools then to correct the problem.
Okay, all right. So we got another text, and this question is: do you think that a program is needed to educate individuals before burnout occurs?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing which we haven't talked about, but I'll just mention it now, is this process of reintroducing creative thinking into your thinking processes to balance this very convergent analytical thing. Once you have done that, you actually increase resilience. And resilience goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence, because all the time that you are able to just step back and think about something before you take action, you're actually reducing the chances of burnout. You're actually reducing the chances of anxiety, because that process of stepping back puts things in perspective. I mean, so often the issues we're talking about occur because somebody is out of, or taking things out of proportion. And you know yourself, if you've got, you wake up in the morning and you're just about to leave the door, and then you trip and the coffee goes all over the front. So you've got to start again, okay, let's go up here, get another. And then you get into the car and the battery's like, oh no, And so by the time the next thing goes wrong, you get to work eventually, and somebody makes a snippy comment about the fact you're late. And then something else happened. You know what? They just used the last cup of coffee from the coffee machine. That means I've got to make a whole, Now, in a normal, those three things, would be irritating, but they're not a disaster. But what so often happens is that by the time you get to hurdle number 3 in your day, it becomes huge. It becomes out of all proportion to the way that it should be. And I'm sure you've seen that. I'm sure the people listening this and watching this, they will have experienced something very similar, where things actually back up. It's like a snowball. It starts with a tiny little problem here, and then by the time you've got through the middle of the day, it's turned into something, much, much, much bigger. And of course, you become a disaster magnet at that point. So that's really another aspect of emotional intelligence. And what using emotional intelligence does, it builds resilience. It's like a little antenna that comes up and says, you know what, this is going out of proportion. And it lets you step back and take a slightly different view of things. And, your blood pressure will go back to normal again. Your breathing pattern will go back to normal again. All these physiological things are very real, and they happen under these kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, I've had those days. And Renita did say, I lived through the boss-induced anxiety. I quit, and the anxiety left. so that's how she solved that.
I'm so glad it did. Now, just to make it clear, strictly speaking, from a psychologist's perspective, that wasn't anxiety, that was stress, because you had a very specific cause, and when you took that cause away, the problem left. And I'm so glad it did.
Yes, so am I. And I like that scenario. It's like when people say, oh, I've had a bad day, when it seems like everything is going wrong. And like you said, with that resilience that you've built up through your programs, it's like, okay, well, this happened and that happened and this happened and that happened. But you kind of take it in stride and not blowing it out of proportion, and just like the universe is against me, just going way off. So I do want to put something here, because I want people to know, number one, about your, about your website, your planforchange.org. And on your website, is that how people can find the different programs all about you? It's so much. I thought, oh my goodness. But they all about you and your programs and how to contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. On that website will also take you to the other website, which is scrolling along the bottom there, hiredrandre.com. There's a button on there to switch between the websites. Also, there is a button there to book a slot on my calendar for a conversation. And so if anybody wants a free half-hour session with me to talk about their particular situation when it comes to burnout, or to talk about creativity, to talk about innovation, anything of that nature, just feel free to do that. So go to planforchange.org, and then hit the calendar button, and you'll be able to book a slot that's convenient to you. I'm on Pacific Standard Time, so the only time I really have a problem, trying to coordinate an appropriate time is if somebody's in Australia or in India. Quite often, that can cause a problem. But other than that, and if that happens, just send me an email, okay, which is Dr. André at dr.andre@planforchange.org. So very happy to talk to anybody about these issues.
Okay, I want to put your email. It's Dr. André at go ahead.
Planforchange.org.
Planforchange.org. Okay. So that is another way that they can reach you. I'm going to put this in.
Absolutely. Just to make sure we've got that right. There's a dot after dr.
There's a dot. Okay, let me
fix
it. Okay, let me edit this. Dr. dot.
Exactly.
Okay, Dr. dot André. Okay, now let's fix it. Okay. So
and if anybody's planning on doing that, just put Dr. Jan in the subject, and I will know where it's come from.
Okay, now why can't I want it to come up? Okay. Anyway, people. Oh, I know, it's because I have all this other stuff on here. Okay, well, I will put it. Okay, here it is. Now, let's add the banner. I don't know why it's not doing it. Well, anyway, it's okay. Dr. dot André at planforchange.org. People.
Exactly.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So, what would you like to leave my audience with in a couple of sentences?
I think I would like to see more people getting creative thinking back in their lives. So if any of you out there are going to make a decision, small decision, big decision, it doesn't matter, just stop for a second and think, are there other options that I'm not seeing? And mix things up a little bit. If you're driving to work or to college or whatever, choose a different route to go to work. Just to take a slightly different route. Go to your favorite restaurant and choose something different from the menu, or even choose a different menu. So creative thinking starts from mixing it up, getting out of those thinking ruts. And I think you'll notice a difference in everything to do with your lives.
Well, thank you. I love that. Thank you. And thank you so much for being my guest. You have really educated me anyway and informed me about burnout. And guess what? After speaking with you, I am not going to be burned out anymore because I know what it is and I know what to do. But if I get to the point where I don't know what to do and I can't handle it, I will contact you.
Be sure to do that. Absolutely. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Jan. It's been wonderful.
You have a beautiful, blessed rest of your evening there in Nevada, where it's warm.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, that was great. That was great. You just never know the difference. Actually, I found out the difference between stress and a little anxiety and burnout. And I know you did too. So look, if you want to just get a handle on burnout, be sure to contact Dr. André. And that's for audio people who are not watching but are listening. It's Dr. dot ANDRE at plan, the number 4, change.org. So I will see you again next week. And I want you to remember about the relationship with yourself, because you can't have a good relationship and a positive relationship if you got a negative relationship with yourself. And just like Dr. André said, if you're suffering from burnout, you heard all of what can happen when you are suffering from burnout. It affects everything. It affects you, affects your life. So I will see you again next week. I want you to remember there are all kinds of relationships, all kinds of relationship matters, and life is about relationships.